So tonight's presentation features Mike Gifford, Open Concept Consulting Inc.'s founder and president, Drupal 8 core accessibility maintainer, and lead author of the Drupal Security Guide. And I'm sure he will say so much more about himself to kick off his presentation. So we'll just leave it at that. Thanks so much, Mike.
Thank you. So, yeah, I've been involved in Drupal for over 10 years now. It's been a great experience working with this community, and it was around 2008 I got involved in looking at accessibility issues. So I've been doing quite a lot of work with web accessibility, and it's been something that's really driven my participation in core, both starting with Drupal 7 to try and find ways to go off and to make that better. We brought Everett Zufeld in years ago now to go off and to help with Drupal core, and he was able to push it a lot further then. Then he got another job and left us, so we couldn't go off and keep getting to do stuff on core, unfortunately. But we've continued to go off and make improvements in Drupal 8 and catch up many of the things we weren't able to get done in Drupal 7. We've been involved in organizing Drupal accessibility events in Ottawa and participating in other events across Canada and around the world. So the first question I want to ask is, who here is familiar with accessibility? And there's a couple people who got some experience, and it's certainly good to hear people talk about that in the introduction. So that's good. Certainly, the people who are blind and visually impaired are certainly one category that people know and think about. And they're an obvious case that people can understand when they're thinking about accessibility. Unfortunately, it's a really small portion of the population, so it's an extreme case, but something that people think about for sure, and it's really quite important. There's also the hard of hearing, people who are deaf. You have people who have physical and motor disabilities. So that's everything from cerebral palsy to missing arms, to injuries, to whatnot. There's temporary disabilities. So again, people who it could even be a matter of people who are taking medication and their vision is a bit off because the medication interferes with their eyesight. It could be all kinds of things that are temporary, like straining your arm, straining your wrist, or getting carpal tunnels, or something like that isn't necessarily a permanent disability. There's also low vision, color blindness, cognitive and learning disabilities. Those are some of the more difficult ones to deal with. Is how do you deal with people? How do you present information so that people who have learning disabilities are able to go out and interpret that information as effectively as possible, present that content to them. And also people with epilepsy, which is, fortunately, it's less of a concern these days because people aren't putting flashing GIFs on every page like they were back in the 90s. So the removal of the GIF apocalypse has definitely been helpful. But we're getting more interactive and more sort of, now that interfaces are using more parallax effects, people are having similar problems with accessibility issues as well. It's not quite as bad as it was with the GIFs, but there are other problems with that, even with that effect. So everyone here who's familiar with accessibility will know about the World Wide Web Consortium. Who doesn't know what the World Wide Web Consortium is? I thought as much. So nobody doesn't know what the World Wide Web Consortium is because this is an HTML crowd, and folks understand the web is these are the folks who found that standard. And it's something that is, it's really quite a great space for people to go off and to explore ideas for pushing the web ahead and pushing the internet ahead. So one of the bodies is the World Wide Web, or sorry, is the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. So there's a group that creates this set of guidelines. And the one that people are moving and developing most work towards is WCAG 2.0. And the standards that are appropriate for the AODA are either level A or level AA. So that's certainly quite useful in terms of what how get to know that guidelines. But WCAG is changing. There's evolutions that are happening in that. And WCAG was founded in 2010, and there's already a lot of cases where for mobile interfaces it's not really well designed, and they need to do a lot of updates for that. So with so many policies being geared to WCAG, I think that's something that it will have implications for us down the line. There's also ARIA, and Fortunately, in Drupal 8, we were able to go off and incorporate a lot of ARIA. When we were building Drupal 7, ARIA was available, and there's a little bit of ARIA, and Everett was helpful making sure that at least in the login screens, or the initialization pages for Drupal.org, that ARIA was being used in Drupal 7. But we really couldn't do it that much in Drupal 8, or sorry, in Drupal 7, because it wasn't mature enough. But ARIA has, which is the accessible rich internet applications, has matured and is now stable enough for platforms like Drupal to build on. It allows us to go up and put a lot of additional semantics into the code to make sure that we can code what is actually happening and provide more context for websites and allow for, again, that richer experience. Then there's ATAG. How many people know the IDRC with OCAD? So there's this is a standard that was actually developed to a large extent here in Toronto, and it's something that we should be taking a lot of pride in. Unfortunately, nobody is going off and doing very much with ATAG just yet, because it was a standard that was just basically released in the fall. So there's a great space for people to look at how to extend this and push the standard forward and apply it. But I'll get to a bit more of this down the line. But it's basically how do we make the authoring experience better for people. And there's also HTML5, and the HTML5 working group is also part of the WC3. So I want to go off and look at why Drupal Drupal 8 has been so good. And part of it is because we've done so much work with Drupal 7. There's so many websites out there that are using and testing Drupal 7, and we've eliminated so many of the low-hanging fruit that are part of it. So there's a solid tested code base. There's semantic markup that we've built into the interface. We have a real effort from the whole community to see that we're standards compliant, to see that we're meeting a high bar for core. And also there's a transparent process, and this is something that so many other applications don't have. They don't have the ability to go off and have that open issue queue to ask questions and to encourage people to go off and to see and to search through and find information to see where there might be bugs. It's good to see that for the WordPress people in the crowd, there are some nice improvements in WordPress to make WordPress more accessible, and they're looking at what we're doing in Drupal and finding ways to go off and to expand on that in WordPress. And hopefully more of that will start to become incorporated in WordPress in future editions. So ARIA is a recommendation that came into place in 2014. It's primarily for screen readers, but not entirely for screen readers. There's enough people who can, where you can build in logic and logic transparency into ARIA so that it can be more useful for other groups. Unfortunately, browsers at this point aren't really making use of that information, not making it useful for other people, but it's incredibly useful for screen readers and for JavaScript and for leveraging that type of interaction especially for screen readers. But it's designed for complex user controls, and we've built in a lot of the roles and properties of ARIA into Drupal 8 so that there's best practices available in core to look at and to replicate. And it's one of the neat things about Drupal core is that there's a solid example that people are able to build on. And if you're building a theme or a module, you're going to look at what's available in core and you're going to extend that and you're going to work with that. You're not going to sort of start from scratch and not look at what else is being developed in order to go off and push that ahead. And again, having these accessibility examples in core, we're going to go off and see that permeate more through the Drupal community and have a broader ability to see this implemented throughout Drupal sites. Whether or not people care about accessibility, it will be something that will become part of the experience of people who are using Drupal, because it is a best practice that's adopted by the community. So we have ARIA described by, role complementary. You'll see things like this within the code base. Role equals button, ARIA live assertive. And I'll go into a bit more detail about what some of these things are, but it just gives you the ability to give additional context and provide a screen reader navigation points throughout the page so they can understand what's going on. So HTML5, we're all familiar with HTML5, so this isn't anything new, but again, this is a big step forward for accessibility because that semantics is built in there. Things like the aside, tag, details, name, header. It's frustrating with things like the WC3 can go off and produce a standard, but they can't actually force browsers to go off and adopt it. So, for example, the details tag, this here it has not been adopted by Firefox, in a really coherent way. It works well for Chrome, but still there's problems with the implementation in Firefox. That's quite the wind out there. So how many people are familiar with the long exhaustive thread in Drupal 7 about the CSS display none? I know Everett is. So, so there's a really long and interesting thread that went back and forth. Really long thread that I'm sure somebody could do a master's thesis on, talking about CSS display none and alternatives to that. And we hashed it out in Drupal 7 and came up with a solution that people were generally fairly happy with, and that was really groundbreaking in a lot of ways for accessibility. Because we took the problem is that browsers go off and interpret, screen readers interpret display none literally. So if you want to hide something visually, people will use display none to go off and to hide that information. But that removes it from sight for screen readers completely. So they can't see that heading that you put in there. That could be useful to them, but it's just invisible. So we created a bunch of things in element invisible, element hidden, and element hidden on focus in Drupal 7, and we've updated those in Drupal 8. But we've decided to go off and to bring in the patterns that have become popularized by the HTML boilerplate project. And this is part of, it'll be a bit of a disruption because there's a lot of modules that will need to get changed. Fortunately, it's a pretty easy thing to go off and do a search or replace. These are just classes that are built into the modules and core that can be easily updated. And this is partly so that we could make sure that there's one central place to go off and control and manage the information and the structure of the information, so that that content can be controlled and managed in a single, straightforward pattern. And we've also added invisible, which was actually hidden and visible are both used in the HTML boilerplate framework. And there we go. And we just brought that forward and using their examples. So new features. We have the ability to go up and use Drupal announce now. So oral alerts are included, which is, again, a nice step up. There aren't a lot of examples of this outside of core at this point, and even inside core, we're not using this as much as we should. But it's basically when content changes on the website and you want to be able to alert somebody with a screen reader that it has changed. You need to be able to provide some standardized, centralized interface to be able to explain to them that the page has been updated. And Drupal Announce allows you to do that. It's a standardized piece of JavaScript that you can use and bundle up in a fairly straightforward way that allows you to incorporate that best practice in your modules and themes. So if there's something you want to be able, if there's content that's changing, whether it's a notice or an alert or a new piece of content that's added, you can use Drupal Announce to go up and say whether or not the information should be assertive or whether it should be polite, and sort of what is the interrupt order that should be used when making that presentation. We've also added the control around the tabbing order. One of the other big challenges of any content management system is when you're tabbing through an interface, people get stuck in a certain in a piece of the code, and they can't tab out of it, and they can't manage the control process. So there's now a centralized structure to manage the process of tabbing through a web page. And there's a lot of people who do use tabs to go off and to navigate through a website and use a keyboard to navigate through the website, because if you learn how to use it effectively, it can actually be faster than using a mouse for web pages that are designed properly. It's also, there's a lot of people who use the keyboard because they have mobility challenges, and instead of using a mouse, which requires a lot of dexterity, they're able to go off and use the keyboard, which is fairly straightforward. And somebody who can only control a sip and puff device can go off and navigate through a website and have that information be presented and control the website by essentially tabbing through that page. So again, that's another big thing that's being brought into Drupal 8, and that we're hoping that more modules are going to start to leverage. I mentioned details earlier, but one of the other changes is using field sets and details rather than field sets to go off and to manage expanding and expandable text. So there's so many places in the admin side where there's text that expands. So you want to be able to hide some admin features so that it doesn't get in the way. And the right way to do this in HTML5 is using details and summaries as opposed to field sets. But it was a huge transition. For accessibility, it was a step ahead because there was a lot of uncertainty as to whether or not field sets could be clustered inside each other. So how many, if you have a field set with a whole bunch of input forms in it that then has additional field sets within it for date items or radio buttons or checkboxes, how well will a screen reader respond to that and present that information? Because they aren't really designed to be structured in that kind of a hierarchical format. But with the field sets and details, it's much easier to go off and to just nest a field set within a detail and not worry about that accessibility problem. Another big one is that we required alt text in Drupal 8, and so this is a bit controversial for some of the accessibility folks out there because not all places require alt text. Not all images require alt text. The vast majority do. In most cases, when you're looking at presenting your content, you're going to want to have the alt text there. But there are some instances where, especially when an accessibility expert who's used to having full control of the HTML will want to go off and to not use alt text. And that's like if you have multiple images, like you have 3 candy canes in a row, you may only want to go off and put the alt text of candy canes and not candy cane, candy cane, candy cane, or candy cane 1, candy cane 2, candy cane 3. Like that would be a redundant and annoying experience for somebody using a screen reader. But we built required alt text in and allowed people to opt out of it. The goal is to make it just that much more irritating to not put in the alt text. Because right now it's too convenient to skip the alt text. And it is the biggest sort of low-hanging fruit for accessibility at this stage is just getting content editors to put in the alt text for the images. Now, ideally, we'll be able to get them to put in high-quality, appropriate alt text, but that's the next step. That's not something we're going to sort of claim that this module will do, or that the Drupal 8 will do out of the box. We came so close to getting this in. Inline form errors. So Brandon Bowersox went off and initiated this a while back, shortly after the release of Drupal 7, and created a pattern that he wanted to go off and adopt for Drupal 8. And for a while in 2015, for probably a month or two, it was actually part of core. And there was a great deal of cheering and whatnot, but it caused some annoying problems with some web forms. So sometimes there were elements that were duplicated that shouldn't be. There were a bunch of weird problems with the Forms API that we weren't able to resolve in time for Drupal 8. So all of this great work around inline form errors was reverted, but as opposed to just tossing it all out, there's already a precedent to go off and make this, to make an experimental module. So the migrate module is also an experimental module. It's part of core, but it's not working at 100% of the capacity like the other parts of core that you would expect. So it has a slightly different level of reliability. And unfortunately, the inline form errors is that way. It is not quite as reliable as it should be in 8.0. Hopefully in 8.1 we'll be able to go out and address those issues and get that brought into core. I haven't seen a lot of advancement in the outstanding issue queues that are related to this problem, but that doesn't mean that it won't get some attention in the near future and be part of part of the release and a full formal working part of Drupal 8.1 or 8.2. It's at least is in the right direction, and it's there for people to test and evaluate. And probably for most sites, it will be just fine. If you need to go off and if you've got an interactive website and you're looking, and accessibility is a really important issue. Like for the CNIB, if you're using this for, I think you use Drupal for your library, don't you?
We use it for our registration site for PCs.
Okay.
Our registration site actually implementing inline forms and stuff.
So if you were using the Drupal 8 for your registration site, it'd be really useful to go off and enable this because a lot of times form errors in Drupal 7 still don't go off and give you information they don't give you errors in an accessible format. They don't necessarily tell you where the problem is in a way that allows you quickly to navigate to it, that makes it understandable, that groups it in a fashion that's clearly understandable.
To be honest, not use it at all. Everything's set to optional.
Right.
And there's additional JavaScript sitting behind it, doing all the work.
Yeah.
The other problem as well, if you've got inline errors, making sure that somewhere in the screen reader knows where those errors are and takes it to the right point.
And we've done a lot to try to make sure that they are asserted at the right point within this.
As we wanted the summaries at the top, but we wanted the individual.
Yeah. That's all there. You just need to enable it to handle the risks.
But the server host is over 8, which is a big difference.
Yes, it's a big jump up, I'm sure. Yeah. There's a bunch of things littler things we've incorporated into Drupal 8 that are mostly good examples. Like we made the font sizes a bit larger. We've improved the color contrast. You'll notice that the header in Bartik is a little bit darker blue. This was actually kind of an annoying issue because we missed this in Drupal 7, but there's a gradient involved in Drupal 7 so that the base color meets the WCAG compliance, but with the gradient it doesn't. So we did some additional testing and realized that we need to go off and fix this for CSS gradients and brought that into place. There's more configurable descriptions in Drupal 8. So if you want to have the information, if you want to have there's the label or the title of an input form, then there's the input box, and then there's the description. You can now put the position above or below the input form. Now, at the moment, that has to be done through code, but certainly is something that's possible right now to go off and to modify that position. And there are some times that it's really it's better to have it in a particular position, to have that control of where that description sits. There's just one H1 on all the pages now, so that's again a good step. And there's better keyboard focus, so we've managed to go off and manage to control the navigation throughout the web pages for keyboard-only users in a way that makes it easier for them to identify where they are. Yep.
So regarding the one H1, I've read mixed reports on whether that's valid or invalid, but is that, obviously to have one H1 is better for SEO in theory, and I understand it's better for accessibility, so is that, whether it's valid or not, just go that way anyway? There's
a lot of cage matches around that particular issue, and I don't know that, and there's also people who question whether or not, if there's not an H1, H2, H3, H4, H5, if it doesn't follow a nice linear order, if you skip a couple, how much it matters? I think that most people using screen readers are used to that kind of inconsistency, and that it probably isn't that big a deal for most users. Isn't a barrier to their access.
Right.
And again, there's two people who would know more than I would about if that's the case or not. But Everett, do you have headings? Is it something that is a barrier to access?
Well, doing it poorly is. I think that browsers have been, I wouldn't say slow, but just not picking up that we were saying that, just make everything H1. Nobody's really picking up that algorithm.
Right.
So I would still recommend, this is an area of great debate, one or two H1s on a page. If you have a main title of your web page, like my plan, that's an H1. And it's your home page, probably your only H1. If it's maybe an article or an interior page where there's a title like We Build Great Digital Products, maybe you do my plan and the We Build Great Digital Products page or heading, but no more than two, probably I think.
So, hope that.
And so as a general implementation method would then field your H1 and don't put it in a WYSIWYG editor, and you're probably safer off.
Don't even allow some.
Yeah.
That goes to a challenge, and one that's hard to solve because of how things are fielded and broken into little components. When we write a piece of content, Drupal, WordPress, any system, you don't know where it's going to be used. You don't like the whole idea of the algorithm for sorting out which heading goes where was a good idea in that you could write a piece of content, and as long as your headings were structured appropriately relative to that piece of content, then the user agents were supposed to, wherever that content appears in line with your document, readjust the heading levels. But that just never materialized. Because if I write a piece of content today, if I use an H2 in my content, and then that works fine if it's heading 1, I have a great blog article, heading 2, my first point with my blog article. When that blog article becomes a teaser, and it's now on a listing page, my title might become heading 2, but now the first point is also heading 2, and it's not actually properly hierarchical. That's a challenge that theoretically there's a way to solve, but user agents have not been able to pick that up. And not just user agents, but assistive technology vendors as well, because they need to work together.
Yeah, it is an interesting puzzle trying to go off and convey information from the content creator to the content consumer through all of this technology. And it's sort of like a series of filters where pieces of information is lost as you go off and get further away from the content author. And the more tools that you provide to go off and to express that meaning and provide the semantics up front, the better it's going to be. But it definitely is a real challenge. So I want to talk a little bit about CK Editor, because that's another big change that we've brought in Drupal 8. Who's disappointed that it wasn't Aloha Editor? Okay. How about Tiny MCE? Okay. So CK Editor works just fine, and it's actually CK Editor. There's been a lot of work done on its accessibility, so it's a fairly accessible platform, and it's something that produces fairly accessible content. It's got captions built into the images, so you can go off and do that nicely. It's got summary and table elements, like so you can provide a semantic table. It's using old, outdated HTML4 language instead of HTML5 language. There's some work that needs to be done to update how the tables are built in CK Editor. But it's a really good step ahead to have that WYSIWYG editor in core. We've also incorporated, it's part of this proudly found elsewhere idea that's been such a big part of Drupal 8. Drupal 8, we didn't want to go off and build everything from scratch ourselves. We wanted to be able to leverage the rest of the community. And one of the advantages of this is that we could go off and look at something like CK Editor and say, this is really great, but we want to go off and make these accessibility changes to it. And you want to go off and have your piece of your WYSIWYG editor or your select list or whatever your widget is distributed to a million other websites, because that will really help your own popularity. So there's a drive for CK Editor's community to get involved and to work with making these improvements. And it's also really helped Drupal 8's accessibility as well, to go off and to take to work with this other community and look at establishing best practices across the board. And WIM in particular has been doing a lot of work with them to try and push issues ahead through the CK Editor issue queue. And with the WYSIWYG Editor in core, it produces is a better opportunity to produce high quality content. So that's again a big step forward, and a lot more consistency for the authors as well. And yeah, there's support for the fig caption element in Drupal for Drupal 5 as well. So back to the authoring tool interface. This is being ATAG is essentially WCAG plus some additional helper tools. It's about making sure that the back-end interface is accessible, which is something we're able to go off and to largely bring into Drupal 7 core and improve on in Drupal 8. But it's adding additional helper elements to that. So things like the required text, enforcing required text for image fields and for CQ editor. That's a really big step ahead for helping authors create that better content. There's also things like expanding the descriptions in the help pages. So there's places where you have, if a content author isn't clear that there is an accessibility tool that they can leverage, they're not likely to use it. So providing information and context within the help pages in Drupal core itself, so that people get a sense of why that's there and how that could help them. Things like there was one of the things we added was the ability to look at the drag and drop interface for managing weights. That was a problem that some people were reporting bugs with this, because they would click on there's a little link to go off into to make that visible, to drop it, to hide the drag and drop sort of functionality, and just have it in numbers. And people would click that, not realizing that they'd click it, and then it's like, help, it's gone. How do I bring it back? And not
that's
realize.
for the whole site as well, right?
What's that?
That's for the whole site as well.
For the whole
not
site.
For the whole page, yeah.
So it's not just, and it stays there because it's done with the cookies. So,
That's right.
because it needs to be user specific.
Yeah.
So again, it's a good pattern for many things, but if you don't have that description in there in the help page, people aren't going to realize, or may overlook the fact that this is something that they can click, they can turn on and turn off.
That's right.
So putting that in the description really helps people understand and get a sense of where this isn't a bug. This is an intentional feature.
That's right.
Yeah. So we're trying in Drupal to default to accessible options, and to do that wherever we can, and not to have this as an external, or as something you can just enable and then hope that that there'll be a parallel available for people who have disabilities. We want to go off and make sure that by default that we're choosing accessible options, because that's going to be the ones that will allow the most number of people to use and benefit the interface. And another thing we brought in as far as the ATAG is filtering HTML and being able to allow headings in filters. So we can now go off and put in headings into the text, so that if somebody's writing a filtered HTML message that they can put in. I think it's just heading 2 to heading 6. I don't think it allows you to go and put in heading 1 in there. And we restricted that because, again, it doesn't make any sense to use heading 1. Yeah. So views and tables are another area that we've made some huge advancements, and that tie into the ATAG model. We've taken views and incorporated that into all the tables that are part of core being generated with views. And we've incorporated, we've done so much work to improve Views UI, so that Views UI is more accessible. That has been a problem that a lot of people have complained about with disabilities, because the Views interface was so complicated. It was a real barrier for their involvement in having that full control of the query builder.
It's complicated for people without.
Yes, exactly. So trying to go off and add that semantics into that, so that it makes sense and that's easier for people to work through, has been a real challenge, but quite important for people who are trying to navigate through that interface. With tables, the tables that are produced by Drupal or by Views now include the summary header information, so that there's a semantic link between the table data and the headers that are associated with it. So it's just built in by default, so you don't have to think about that, and that there's just that semantics built into the tables that are produced by core. There's also caption and summary elements that you can organize when you're creating your table views, and you can define your summary and caption information at that point. So yeah, caption, summary, header ID. Those are the main elements we brought from there. So the inline form errors, I've talked about this a little bit. It's an optional module. It allows you to jump right down to the error, so that you can see it right at the top where the errors are. It's bold and it's clearly identified. And then when you click on the error, you just jump right down to the issue that you need to address. It's convenient for everyone who's running into form errors, which we all run into when you're working with any complicated web form. They're designed to be easily understood. They're defined by more than just color, and there's a semantic relationship defined between the summary element at the top and the issue or the full description that's tied in with the form element. So, yeah, we didn't get that into to core, and I had to go off and throw this in here because I needed to talk briefly about my. People think about free software and they think about free as in beer or free as in speech, but I want to remind people that this is free as in kittens, and that it's important to think about nurturing that kitten. And one of the reasons that we didn't, I mean, there's nearly 4,000 people that have contributed to core, which is great. But there wasn't enough attention to many of the accessibility challenges that we were struggling with, and so despite the heroic efforts of many of the core developers who looked at and struggled with and worked on these issues, there weren't enough efforts to go off there weren't enough resources put into solving this difficult problem, it's for all the people who depend on accessibility of this free software. I'm still baffled that for Drupal 8 core, we encouraged a blind Italian student who was in high school. Vincenzo Urbano was really interested in Drupal 7 when he was in his last year of high school, or Drupal 8, and he worked on trying to go out and find ways to identify and to contribute to Drupal 8. And as an individual, he's contributed more than any organization working on accessibility issues, as well as all the governments of the world, as well as pretty much every government institution, or every educational institution in the world. Because there's so few people who've gone off and been working on these accessibility issues who are not, like, the people who've pushed these accessibility issues ahead are, they're working for ARIA, they're working for Open Concept, they're working for very small shops. I mean, Scott's done so much with from on and off with his contributions to core, and it's really great that he's now a core, not a contributor, but a core committer. I mean, that's amazing. It's a really big success story for any young Canadian developer to be in that position, and definitely appreciate all the work that you've done allowing Scott to contribute to core and to go to these conferences and to follow his passion in this area. But we need more people like that. And there aren't enough Drupal shops who've stepped forward and taken that initiative to go off and fund core contributors to look at these problems and to make accessibility a big enough a priority in order to go off and to see that we are able to make Drupal 8 an orally pleasing interface that really allows for everyone to be able to use this tool in the way that we had hoped it to be.
So how can we help? How is that?
There's a long issue.
Where should we go?
With this kitten slide, this goes off and this answers all the questions. So the Drupal issue queue is definitely the place to go off and to look, and there's an accessibility tag that you can use to look at it, and there's the Drupal 8.1 issue queue as well as the 8.0 issue queue, which you can look at, and that's really the best place to go off and to look at those places, and it's becoming a bigger issue for so many organizations, partly because we have WAI standards here for many institutions here in Ontario, but that may well be the standard that is adopted for organizations going ahead in Canada with the Canadians with the Disability Act. There's a reasonable chance the Liberals will put forward something like the AODA, but for the entire Canadian government. There's a lot of changes in the US around accessibility, and trying to go off and adopt better accessibility practices that are again going to WCAG 2.0 AA, because since 1997 they haven't managed to update their Section 508 to be able to keep up with the times, and they've stuck to an older, out-of-date piece of legislation that's no longer serving its purpose.
What's the state of the 3 clickable A's?
The three, I am still opposed to the 3 clickable A's. It's something that when it boils down to it, the browser is the right place to do this. It is not the best place to go off and put that into a bunch of JavaScript. It cannot provide as much control as the browser does to the interface.
Why does it keep happening?
Because it's a pattern that people can understand. And ultimately, we had this on our old website, and I haven't seen it used in many other places, but when people see that AA, they know to go off and to click on that link and something will happen. And what they should do is they should learn if they want to make their browser, or make the fonts bigger, they should hit Control P or plus. If they want to make it smaller, they should go Control minus. And what else do you need to know?
No, that makes sense.
Yeah, you never have to worry about that wasted real estate being. So it's an educational issue, and there aren't enough websites that are pushing that education.
So go to a page that explains what control plus and minus,
Yeah.
the 3 A's, and take them to another page.
That's right. Here's
Well,
how
I did that. The website, it has a little, you click on it and it has to be in big text.
Yeah.
And it's a little straightforward. And explain what to do.
There's some great videos to do this as well. So you can just point them to a video, or they can watch the video on YouTube and learn how to do that.